Maplewood was the kind of town where everything stayed the same. The lawns were always neatly trimmed. The houses looked like they came from a catalog, and the people had an unspoken agreement to pretend that nothing out of the ordinary ever happened. It was the perfect place for someone looking for a quiet life, or at least that's what Officer Jay Carter had thought when he transferred here. He had left behind the chaos of city policing for what he assumed would be peaceful patrols, maybe the occasional speeding ticket or a call about a lost dog. What he hadn't anticipated was them. They called themselves the Neighborhood Protection Group, but everyone in town knew them by a different name, the Karen Coalition. A force of suburban chaos wrapped in pastel cardigans and oversized sunglasses, they believed themselves to be the true authority in Maplewood. Rules were things they selectively enforced, and law enforcement was a mere inconvenience to their reign. At the head of this coalition was Patricia Whitmore, self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood. She carried herself with the confidence of a CEO, if that CEO's company consisted of nosy housewives and Facebook conspiracy theories. Patricia had an opinion about everything and believed the world should function exactly how she dictated. And if it didn't, well, she had a lawyer's number on speed dial and a social media army ready to unleash outrage at a moment's notice. Her right-hand women were just as formidable in their own unique ways. Linda, the self-appointed journalist, never went anywhere without her phone's camera rolling. She had a habit of screaming, "I'm recording this," in situations that rarely warranted such a dramatic declaration. Then there was Debbie, the gossip queen, whose favorite pastime was twisting any situation into a scandal. If someone so much as sneezed in public, Debbie would have 3 different versions of the event circulating by dinner. And finally, Susan, the legal expert who based her legal knowledge entirely on things she had read in Facebook comments. Officer Jay Carter had encountered plenty of entitled people in his career, but this group was different. They were relentless. Every day, it was something new. A complaint about how the police were harassing law-abiding citizens. Translation: enforcing basic traffic laws. An emergency call about suspicious activity. Translation: a delivery driver simply existing, or an attempt to dictate police procedure based on a half-baked understanding of the Constitution. But things had been escalating. The Karens had grown bolder. What had started as petty complaints had turned into direct interference. Last week, Patricia had stormed into the police station demanding that Jake be reprimanded for unlawful intimidation. His crime? Pulling over her son for running a stop sign. Apparently, basic road laws didn't apply to her family. Then there was the incident with Linda, who had screamed at officers for violating her First Amendment rights when asked to step away from an active crime scene. The crime scene in question, a raccoon stuck in a trash can. Jake had tried to stay patient. He had tried reasoning with them, but patience only went so far. He knew something bigger was coming. Patricia and her crew weren't the type to accept defeat quietly. And sure enough, the Karens were already plotting their next big move. It started, as most disasters do, with an overblown sense of self-importance. Patricia Whitmore had gathered her loyal followers in the grand living room of her oversized MCM, the heart of what she liked to call Karen headquarters. The walls were adorned with motivational quotes about taking charge and never backing down, as if they were preparing for a noble war rather than another petty suburban power struggle. Seated around her were Linda, Debbie, and Susan, who listened with eager anticipation, nodding as Patricia paced dramatically, holding a printed-out list of grievances against the Maplewood Police Department. At the top of the list, Officer Jay Carter. "He's out of control," Patricia declared, slamming the paper onto the table as if it were a damning piece of evidence. "He's scared to pull me over me," Patricia Whitmore, as if I were some common criminal. Linda gasped as she replayed the video on her phone, the one she had streamed live during the traffic stop. The footage showed Patricia in her car, dramatically refusing to hand over her license while proclaiming, "I do not answer to you. This is entrapment." Meanwhile, Officer Carter could be seen standing by the car, arms crossed, a look of sheer exasperation on his face. The video ended when Patricia sped off before she was promptly mailed a ticket. "He's been harassing us for months." Debbie chimed in, leaning forward. "Remember when he forced me to move my car? I was parked for 5 minutes. You were in a fire lane, Susan muttered, but nobody was listening. Patricia leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Ladies, it's time we take back this neighborhood. We cannot allow these so-called law enforcement officers to trample over our rights. Linda gasped. You don't mean, oh, I do. Patricia said with a smirk. The Maplewood PD is about to learn who really runs this town. The first move in the so-called Karen takeover came the very next day. Officer Jay Carter was enjoying what he had hoped would be an uneventful morning when the first incident occurred. Dispatch had sent him a call about a suspicious person outside of Maplewood Grocery. When Jake arrived, he found a bewildered teenage delivery driver standing beside his van, surrounded by Patricia and her gang. Linda, of course, had her phone raised, recording dramatically. This man, Patricia declared, gesturing at the poor kid like he was a dangerous fugitive, is loitering. Jake sighed, rubbing his temples. Ma'am, he's delivering groceries. That's what he says. Patricia countered. But how do we know that's true? He could be scouting. Jake turned to the teenager who just shrugged and held up a receipt. I'm literally supposed to drop these off at her house. He pointed at Linda, who blinked in surprise. Oh, well, she quickly put her phone down. That's beside the point. Jake didn't even bother responding. He simply turned and walked back to his patrol car, knowing full well this was only the beginning. The second incident happened later that afternoon. Jake was called to the Maplewood HOA meeting. The Kens had assembled everyone, calling an emergency session to discuss what they called the officer problem. The community center was packed with confused residents, most of whom had no idea why they were even there. At the front of the room, Patricia stood beside a giant presentation screen, a laser pointer in hand. Good evening, everyone, she began, clearing her throat. I have called this meeting today because our very way of life is under attack. The Maplewood Police Department, specifically Officer Jay Carter, has repeatedly violated our freedoms. Jake, standing in the back with his arms crossed, allowed a deep sigh as Patricia clicked her slide. The screen changed to a dramatic PowerPoint presentation titled The Oppression of Maplewood's Law-Abiding Citizens. The first slide showed a blurry image of Jake writing a parking ticket. This, Patricia continued, is an example of the tyranny we are dealing with. The audience blinked. Someone coughed. I parked in a fire lane one time, she went on, and this man had the audacity to give me a ticket. Are we really going to stand by and let this kind of abuse continue? Silence. A single cricket chirped in the background. A voice finally spoke up from the crowd. Patricia, you were in a fire lane. Patricia glared at the interruption. That's not the point, Linda. Linda blinked. I thought we were mad about the grocery guy. Patricia quickly flipped to the next slide, which was a still image of Jake drinking coffee at the station. And this, she said, ignoring the confusion, is what our taxpayer dollars are funding while we suffer under his tyranny. Officer Carter is sipping lattes instead of protecting our town. Jake finally spoke up. That's gas station coffee. Patricia ignored him, which is why we must act. From this day forward, the Karen Coalition will take back the neighborhood. We will keep our streets safe. We will enforce the laws. Wait, someone interrupted. Are you trying to say you're the law now? That's exactly what I'm saying, Patricia declared proudly. From now on, we're running our own patrols. We'll handle our safety our own way. Jake's eyes widened slightly. You can't, but it was too late. The Kens had declared war. The Karen Neighborhood Patrol launched the very next morning. It was somehow even worse than Jake had imagined. Patricia, Linda, and Debbie strutted through the neighborhood in matching t-shirts that read Karen Neighborhood Patrol, complete with homemade badges. Susan, ever the legal expert, see? They carried a clipboard with pages of irrelevant legal jargon. Their first order of business, attempting a citizen's arrest. The unlucky victim, Mr. Reynolds, an 80-year-old retiree, was walking his dog without a leash. You are under arrest, Patricia announced, planting herself in front of him. Mr. Reynolds frowned. Excuse me, you're violating ordinance, she glanced at Susan. Susan flipped through her clipboard, something about reckless endangerment. Jake arrived just in time to see Mr. Reynolds looking completely unimpressed while Patricia dramatically pointed at the dog, a 15-year-old golden retriever who was currently asleep on the sidewalk. Really? Jake asked flatly. This criminal was endangering the community? Patricia huffed. Jake stared at them, then at the half-sleeping dog. You know what? He said. Carry on. Patricia beamed. See, even the officer agrees. Wait, what? Jake leaned down and patted the dog's head. Duke here looks pretty dangerous. Maybe he's running an underground dog fighting ring. Susan furrowed her brows. Wait, is that sarcasm? Couldn't say, Jake said, standing up. But I can say that interfering with actual law enforcement is a real crime. And if you keep this up, you're going to see what an actual arrest looks like. Patricia scoffed. You wouldn't dare. Jake smiled. Try me. Patricia crossed her arms, eyes narrowing. This wasn't over, and Jake knew it. The Karen Neighborhood Patrol wasn't just an embarrassment. It was a full-scale nuisance. In less than 24 hours, Patricia and her squad had managed to create complete chaos in Maplewood. Reports flooded into the police department about suspicious activity, all of which turned out to be completely innocent people simply existing. A jogger was stopped and interrogated for running too fast. A teenage boy on a skateboard was accused of reckless endangerment. A mother pushing a stroller was nearly detained under suspicion of unlicensed childcare. Jake had lost count of how many times he'd been called to de-escalate situations that Patricia and her squad had started, and every single time, the Karens refused to admit they were the problem. Then they took a step further. Jake was halfway through his morning patrol when his radio crackled. Dispatch to Officer Carter. You're going to want to hear this one. Jake sighed. Go ahead. Yeah, we got a Karen patrol vehicle attempting a traffic stop on Maplewood Avenue. Jake nearly choked on his coffee. You what? You heard me, Dispatch said clearly, trying to hold back laughter. They've got sirens and a loudspeaker. Jake hit the gas. When he arrived, he saw it. The most ridiculous sight of his entire career. A black SUV with flashing dollar store LED lights sat in the middle of the road, blocking traffic. Plastered on the side of the vehicle was a homemade decal that read, Karen Patrol, keeping Maplewood safe in big, bold letters. Standing in front of the stopped car was Patricia, clipboard in hand, while Linda recorded the entire encounter. The gossip queen was already talking on her phone, probably updating the entire HOA in real time. The driver of the stopped vehicle was a middle-aged man, looking both confused and furious. Jake stepped out of his cruiser, rubbing his temples. Patricia, what the hell are you doing? Patricia turned with the smugness of someone who believed they were about to deliver a grand speech. Officer Carter, we have every right to enforce the laws of our community. Jake stared at her, then at the other Karens. You're not the police. Well, someone has to uphold the rules, Patricia sniffed. This man was driving recklessly. The driver threw his hands in the air. I was going 28 in a 30. Patricia ignored him. Furthermore, I suspect he has an illegal window tint. Jake turned his gaze to the car. It was a completely standard vehicle. The windows weren't tinted at all. Jake exhaled slowly. Move your car. Patricia put her hands on her hips. No. Jake pulled out his ticket book. Move your car. Patricia gasped. You wouldn't. Jake calmly began writing. Illegal obstruction of traffic, unauthorized use of emergency lights, unlawful detainment of a civilian. Should I keep going? Linda gasped. This is a violation of our rights. Jake ripped the ticket off the book and held it out to Patricia. Take the ticket and move your car, or I'll tow it. Patricia snatched the paper from his hand like a child being scolded. This isn't over, she hissed. Jake chuckled. I know. Patricia's defeat only made her more determined. The next morning, the Karens stormed into the police station and demanded a meeting with the chief of police. Jake was in the break room when he heard the chaos unfold. He leaned against the doorway, sipping his coffee as Chief Anderson stared at the three women across his desk, looking like he was deeply regretting every career decision that had led him to this moment. Patricia slammed down a cease and desist order. This, she declared, is a formal demand for Officer Jake Carter to stand down. He is harassing law-abiding citizens and violating our constitutional rights. Chief Anderson didn't even look at the paper. Patricia, this is a printed-out Facebook post. Patricia pursed her lips. Legal precedent must be upheld. Jake stifled a laugh as Chief Anderson pinched the bridge of his nose. Ladies, let me be very clear. You are not the police. You have zero legal authority. And if you continue interfering in police matters, I will press charges for obstruction. Patricia looked personally offended. You can't do that. Yes, I can. Linda shoved her phone in his face. I'm recording this. Good, Chief Anderson said flatly. Now get out. The Karens stormed out in fury, but Jake knew they weren't done yet. And sure enough, they escalated again. 2 nights later, an emergency call came through, multiple suspects attempting to enter the police station. They're wearing matching t-shirts. Jake and his fellow officers rushed to the front entrance, and there, standing outside the station, was the entire Karen coalition was wearing matching black shirts that read, "Justice for Maplewood, disband the police." They were holding signs and chanting loudly into the night. Patricia stood at the front, megaphone in hand. "The police work for us," she screeched. "No more tyranny." Jake turned to his fellow officers. "Is this a protest?" The officers sighed. "I think so." Linda was walking through the crowd, dramatically live streaming. "We are under siege. Our rights are being trampled. The authorities are abusing their power." Jake looked around at the 3 other officers beside him. "Are we the authorities in this scenario?" "Guess so," Jake sighed. "All right, let's shut it down." He stepped forward, arms crossed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, "as much as I appreciate the enthusiasm, you're trespassing on police property." Patricia whirled around. "This is a public place." "No," Jake said, pulling out his flashlight. "This is police property, and it's after midnight. If you don't leave, we're going to have to remove you." Patricia turned back to her followers. "See, this is exactly what I mean. The government is silencing us." Jake nodded to his officers. "All right, start clearing them out." The officers began herding the Karens away. Then the dumbest move in history happened. Patricia charged at Jake. Jake barely had time to react before Patricia grabbed his badge and attempted to rip it off his chest. Everything stopped. Linda gasped, Debbie screamed, and Susan clutched her clipboard like a shield. Jake slowly tilted his head. "Did you just attack a police officer?" Patricia blinked. Then realization dawned on her face. Oh, before she could finish, Jake had her cuffed and against the wall. "I told you," he muttered, snapping the cuffs in place. "Try me." As Patricia shrieked, Linda and Debbie wailed in horror, phones still recording. But it was too late. The Karen revolution had just failed spectacularly, and Jake couldn't wait to see what nonsense came next. Patricia's arrest was supposed to be a warning, a moment where common sense finally took hold. Any rational person would have taken the hint, posted a long-winded Facebook rant about police corruption, and moved on. But Patricia Whitmore wasn't any rational person. Instead of retreating in shame, she doubled down. By the time Jake Carter returned to work the next day, Patricia had already posted a dramatic video titled, "Help! I was arrested for standing up to tyranny." The video, expertly edited by Linda, showed only part of the incident, conveniently cutting out the part where Patricia lunged at Jake. Instead, it painted her as a helpless victim of police oppression, complete with sad background music and an overlay that read, "Patricia's story matters." Within hours, it had over 20,000 views, and now the entire town of Maplewood was divided. Jake arrived at the police station to a scene of absolute madness. A crowd of protesters had gathered outside. Some were genuine believers, people who had bought into Patricia's sob story. Others were. They were just opportunists, angry about things completely unrelated to Patricia, but eager to latch onto something. They held signs with slogans like "Defund the Karen haters," "Justice for Patricia," and "Abolish traffic laws." Jake was pretty sure that one was just some kid who wanted to speed legally. The loudest of them, however, was Patricia herself, now out on bail, standing on a small makeshift stage, giving a speech like she was some kind of political revolutionary. "This," she yelled into a megaphone, pointing dramatically at the police station, "is what happens when you stand up for your rights. They silence you. They put you in handcuffs. They oppress you." Jake sighed, turning to one of his fellow officers. How long has this been going on? The officer shrugged. A couple of hours. They're demanding we fire you. Jake scoffed. Not happening. As if sensing his arrival, Patricia suddenly turned, locking eyes with him. Her face twisted into a triumphant smirk. There he is, she shouted. The tyrant himself. The enemy of Maplewood. The crowd roared in agreement. Jake took a slow breath. This was going to be a long day. The protest dragged on for hours. Patricia, emboldened by the attention, began listing every single thing she disliked about Jake. He wrote me a ticket for rolling through a stop sign. The crowd booed. He pulled over my son for speeding. The crowd gasped. He once gave me a look in the grocery store that made me feel unsafe. The crowd absolutely lost it. Jake pinched the bridge of his nose. Then, as if this wasn't dumb enough, Patricia made her worst decision yet. That night, while most of the town slept, the Karen coalition gathered for a clandestine meeting. Patricia had one final desperate plan. If the police won't listen to us, she declared, pacing dramatically, then we'll make them listen. Linda, Debbie, and Susan exchanged nervous glances. What exactly are you suggesting? Linda asked. Patricia smirked. We hit them where it hurts. She pulled out a giant stack of official-looking papers. This, she said proudly, is our declaration of police takeover. Susan frowned. That's just a bunch of printed-out legal documents from Facebook. Patricia ignored her. Tomorrow morning, we storm the police station. We march inside and arrest Officer Jake Carter ourselves. Silence. Then Debbie whispered, Can we actually do that? No, Susan deadpanned. That's illegal. Patricia waved her off. Laws are only real if you believe in them. Linda clapped excitedly. Oh, that sounds legal. And just like that, the dumbest coup in history was officially underway at exactly 9 a.m. The Karen coalition arrived at the police station. Marching in single file, they wore matching T-shirts that read, Maplewood has fallen, and each carried a manila folder filled with nonsense legal documents. The officers at the front desk barely looked up. Jake was already watching from a distance, sipping his coffee, waiting to see how this would play out. Patricia strode forward and slammed her documents onto the desk. I am here to file a formal declaration of citizen's arrest against Officer Jake Carter. The desk sergeant didn't even blink. That's not a thing. Patricia grinned. It is now. She turned and dramatically pointed at Jake. Officer Carter, she boomed, you are hereby under arrest for gross abuse of power and crimes against suburban decency. Jake stared at her. You can't arrest me. Yes, I can. Patricia snapped. We have legal precedent. Jake crossed his arms. Oh yeah? What precedent? Linda quickly flipped through her manila folder. Section 14 of the U.S. Constitution. That's not a thing. It is if you believe in it. Patricia insisted. Jake sighed. Patricia, if you don't leave in the next 5 seconds, I'm arresting you. Patricia smirked. Huh, nice try, but you can't arrest me. I'm making a citizen's arrest. Jake pulled out his handcuffs. All right, you asked for it. Patricia blinked. Wait, what? In one fluid motion, Jake spun her around and cuffed her. The other Karen screamed. Linda dropped her phone, Debbie fainted, and Susan clutched her clipboard like a lifeline. Jake sighed. Patricia Whitmore, you are under actual arrest for trespassing, obstruction, and attempting to impersonate a law enforcement officer. Patricia gawked. Jake gently guided her toward the holding cell. You'll have plenty of time to think about your legal precedent in here, he said dryly, locking the door behind her. Linda gasped. This is oppression. Debbie wailed. You can't do this. She's a taxpayer. Jake smirked. That's funny. You guys don't believe in laws, remember? Patricia glared at him through the bars. This isn't over, she hissed. Jake chuckled. I really hope it is, but deep down, he knew Patricia would be back. The Karen wars were far from over, and Jake couldn't wait for the next round. Maplewood's dumbest coup attempt had officially failed. Patricia Whitmore, self-proclaimed leader of the revolution, had spent a whole night in a holding cell before her lawyer, who was clearly exhausted from dealing with her, managed to negotiate bail. The next morning, she walked out of the police station with all the grace of a dethroned queen, her minions waiting outside with tears in their eyes and justice for Patricia signs still in hand. Linda had recorded the whole thing for her live stream, calling it the day Maplewood fell to tyranny. The video had a grand total of 5 likes, 4 of which were from the Karens themselves. Jake Carter, however, wasn't in the mood for a victory dance. He knew this wasn't over. People like Patricia never learned. The fallout from the Karen Revolution was just beginning. The resolution was immediate and spectacular. First, the HOA president called an emergency meeting. For years, Patricia had bullied her way through the HOA, threatening lawsuits over the color of mailboxes, demanding exclusive voting rights, and once even trying to ban Halloween decorations because they offended her aesthetic. But now, she had finally gone too far. The meeting was packed. Nearly the entire neighborhood showed up, ready to witness what everyone hoped would be Patricia's final downfall. At the front, the HOA president, Mr. Thompson, a quiet, reasonable man who had tolerated Patricia for years, stood up and adjusted his glasses. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, clearing his throat, "I believe we can all agree that certain members of this community have become a significant disturbance." Murmurs of agreement followed. He continued, "For the first time in HOA history, we are moving for a formal expulsion of a resident, effective immediately. Patricia Whitmore is banned from all HOA meetings, decisions, and committees." A wave of cheers erupted. Patricia shot to her feet. "This is a violation of my rights." Mr. Thompson adjusted his glasses again. "No, Patricia, this is called consequences." And just like that, Patricia was officially powerless. The next blow came from the judge when Patricia finally appeared in court for her multiple charges: trespassing, obstruction, and impersonating an officer. She arrived expecting to win. After all, in her mind, she was the real victim. She had spent the entire week preparing her defense, which consisted of a 30-page printed-out legal document that was just a mix of random internet articles, a PowerPoint presentation titled, "Why Officer Jake Carter Should Be Removed from Duty," and a list of grievances dating back 6 years, including things like "once looked at me rudely in a Starbucks." Unfortunately for her, the judge wasn't impressed. The trial lasted 15 minutes. The judge barely looked at her papers before issuing a verdict: community service, 200 hours, a hefty fine, and a formal restraining order preventing her from interfering with police matters. Patricia's jaw hit the floor. The moment court ended, she stormed out, muttering about filing an appeal, while Linda and Debbie wailed dramatically in the background. But the best part? Her mugshot was now public record. Someone, probably Jake, leaked it, and it immediately became a meme. By the end of the week, Maplewood High School kids were printing it on T-shirts. Despite all this, Patricia refused to back down. Completely determined to restore her reputation, she tried one last desperate stunt. She fled to another town. For weeks, nobody saw her. Then one day, Jake received a text message from an officer in the next county over. It was a photo of Patricia getting arrested again, along with the message, "Is this one of yours?" She tried to fire our sheriff. Jake laughed for a solid 5 minutes. With Patricia finally out of Maplewood, things went back to normal. Jake continued his patrols, grateful for the peace. A break from absolute stupidity. The HOA flourished without Patricia's constant interference. The Karen coalition disbanded. Linda eventually gave up her activism and went back to making Facebook cooking videos. Debbie moved on to a new scandal, and Susan, who had never been fully on board with the whole mess, quietly disappeared back into her normal life. But of course, Jake knew that somewhere, somehow, another Karen was plotting their next great act of entitlement. And when that came, Jake would be ready. The Karen wars were never truly over. The end for now.